Aaron, I want to start with you because you know Atlanta and Georgia just as well as anybody actually down there covering the state. And the Atlanta Journal-Constitution notes that this bus tour is a big deal because it is outside the ATL. Talk about why that is in fact the case.
Absolutely. Good to be with you, Simone. Listen, South Georgia is definitely not Atlanta. It is quite a ways from Atlanta, and it is a world away in terms of it being a very different Georgia. I mean, this is going to bring a focus on rural Americans. It's going to bring a focus on, working class folks, really the kind of people that she's trying to highlight, and that the campaign, says that they're focused on the middle class and folks that are trying to get into the middle class. She had that housing ad up today that really tapped into one of the most important issues for voters in this election, which is the issue of affordability. I mean, people in South Georgia are definitely struggling to make ends meet, whether you're talking about gas prices, whether you're talking about housing, whether you're talking about groceries. And so to hear directly from the Vice President and Governor Walz about what they would do for these voters as president is going to be something that could be very meaningful, not just for people in South Georgia, but for people in communities all across the country that look like those communities in South Georgia. I think it really says something that this is where they're choosing to go coming out of that convention. To focus on Americans who are struggling, even as this campaign is so much of it has been about momentum and joy.
Absolutely. I mean, rural Georgia is, in fact, in play. You got to close those margins all across the state if they want to be competitive. McKay, I want to play what Harris Principal Deputy Campaign Manager Quentin Fulks said about this. Take a listen.
We have to be statewide in that state and even compete in counties that Democrats don't traditionally go. That is how you win statewide in Georgia.
This is her second trip to Georgia since taking the spot at the top of the ticket. And the bus tour, again, is going to go to rural areas. McKay, Quentin Fulks knows a little bit about closing the gaps and going all over the state. He was the campaign manager to Senator Warnock's very successful Senate campaign. Are these the kind of plays that might make the Trump team nervous?
I would have to think so. You know, it was not that long ago at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee when Chris LaCivita was briefing reporters and talking about how the Trump campaign was expanding the map, how they were going to possibly contest states like New Mexico and Virginia, how they were so far ahead of Biden in the traditional battleground states that they were going to be able to venture into these states that have been trending blue in the last few election cycles. I don't think we're hearing a lot of that same rhetoric from the Trump campaign anymore. The fact that the Harris campaign is doing this pretty ambitious blitz in Georgia suggests that they see a real opportunity there. And from the Trump campaign's perspective, if they have to be defending a state like Georgia, talk of expanding the map and contesting states like New Mexico is probably off the table at this point. And I do think that shows how much the race has shifted just in the last few weeks since Harris got to the top of the Democratic ticket.
McKay, one follow-up for you there. In selecting Senator J.D. Vance, did the Trump campaign also think that J.D. Vance was an expansion of the map running mate? Because to me it suggested they were doubling down on the base. But I too, they heard all the briefings and they were very forceful about the fact that not only New Mexico, but Minnesota was even in play.
Yeah, I mean, I think when LaCivita would talk about J.D. Vance, he would say, we're just going to drop him in states like Pennsylvania, let him move in there and win the state for us. I don't think that they necessarily saw Vance as somebody who was going to compete in new blue states, although Minnesota would have been one where he could have contested. But I do think they saw him as somebody who could kind of solidify the gains Republicans were making in the so-called blue wall states, those Midwestern states, while Trump expanded into other states. Though I also have a theory that J.D. Vance was a pick born out of supreme overconfidence by the Trump campaign. You recall at this point, Biden was still at the top of the ticket. They were riding that disastrous performance that Biden had in the debate. And I think Trump just thought he could pick whoever he wanted because he thought he was on track to win. The race looks very different now than it did when he picked J.D. Vance as running mate.
Oh, what a difference a month makes. Tolu, speaking of the difference that a month makes, the Harris-Walz campaign has scheduled a sit-down interview Thursday. It's going to happen in Savannah during this, I guess, essentially during the bus tour, although it's my understanding the Savannah stop was a solo stop for the vice president only. The vice president's opponents have been calling for an interview. They say the plain side gaggles were not enough. They think she should sit for an interview. Members of the media apparatus have been asking for it. The voters haven't been demanding an interview, though. So what do you think it says that this has gotten scheduled at this time? Do you think we'll see more? What is the White House chatter from the press corps tonight?
Well, people have been talking about an interview for the last several weeks, in part because every White House reporter wants to get an interview with Kamala Harris. She's the hottest ticket right now in presidential politics because she's new. She's not someone who has been running for a year. And also people want to know what she thinks about various policies that she took, positions that she took in 2019, where she is now. And in part because the Trump campaign has not really been able to land a punch on her. And the strategy they've been using over the last several weeks is to say she has to stay unscripted. She is not good unscripted. She cannot answer questions. She's hiding from the press. Those are the arguments that they're making. And now she has sort of met the challenge of saying, I will do an interview. Whether or not she delivers on that and how she performs during the interview will be important to understanding whether or not she can beat back the latest charge from the Trump folks, because they first charged her with, whether or not she's black or whether or not she's Asian, whether or not she as a woman can stand before leaders on the world stage. She's been able to push back against a lot of those arguments, and they've tried to label her as a liberal. We saw her in Chicago say, I'm the president, I would be the president for all Americans, including Republicans and moderates. And so now they're saying she can't do an interview. She's scheduled this interview, and whether or not she's able to sort of rise to the moment will determine whether or not the Trump folks go to another tactic and try to land a punch on her in a different way.
I just have to wonder, is there, and I was talking to some strategists and then some reporters today about this, and I'm wondering, you're White House bureau chief. I know you have to give the marching orders, if you will, to the reporters. Is there a double standard here in some respect? Because Donald Trump, he talks a lot to the press, but he doesn't tell the truth oftentimes. Sometimes he doesn't answer questions at all. He'll run over the reporters verbally, if you will. But does that make it okay, like just because he's answering questions, but if he's not telling the truth, is there a double standard here?
Well, Trump is one of the hardest people to interview, in part because he does not have any allegiance to the truth. A lot of times he just says what's on his mind. A lot of times he strays very far from the truth, and trying to fact check him in real time is very difficult. And so he's sort of made a strategy of using the media to sort of put forward his bluster and, bowl over reporters and not stop to sort of focus on the facts. And so he's been very willing to talk to the press, in part because he knows he can't be fact-checked in real time, while as Kamala Harris knows that if she does talk to the press, a lot of the things she says is going to be picked apart. And some people would say that is a double standard. Some people would say that's different strategies. As a reporter, we obviously want access in every different circumstance because we want to be able to ask questions that our readers and our viewers are asking us, and they want to know what the candidate thinks. But it is a very difficult situation when you have one candidate who is not caring about the truth and you have another candidate who's going to be picked apart over whether or not she sticks to the truth. They're operating in very different lanes. As reporters, we obviously want them to be everywhere, talking to the press, talking to reporters as much as possible to find out what they believe. But it's a very different circumstance when you're looking at Trump, when you're looking at Harris. They have two different approaches to the truth, and that makes it hard to gauge them and judge them on the same rubric.